studied so much for this sermon and found things that just literally blew my mind, so I'm going to blow yours today. If you want to turn your hymnals to 1 Kings 18:21. 1 Kings 18:21.
Yep. You can use your
I mean
Bible.
hymnals, I'm sorry. Your Bibles. Did you realize I said that? 1 Kings 18:21. Is there any children that's going to children's church? Okay, so we're all good.
Yeah.
It's only 3?
Yeah.
Okay. In 1 Kings 18:21, it was during the time of Elijah, and Elijah came into all the people and said, "How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." And the people answered him not a word. Now during this time, there were kings of the upper part of Israel, and we had kings in the southern part of Israel, because at that point Israel had split. And there were Baal worshipers so badly that there was a challenge between Elijah with the God of Israel versus Baal, their God. And they set an altar, built an altar, and a fire. Built an altar for a burnt offering, but there was no fire. Instead, they poured water all over it. And to the 450 Baal worshipers, they said, "You called your God to consume your sacrifice." And they called, and they prayed, and they did all they could, but he didn't show up, did he? Well, the God of Israel did. But Elijah stood alone. No one said a word. No one. But he said, if the Lord God is your God, follow him. But if Baal is your God, follow him. So this is where it comes in. Ahab was the king during that period. And there are a lot of parallels in the Bible. And the reason I brought this up is because there are things in the Bible that you will see that biblical history literally repeats itself. We showed that last week when we talked about the part that all the deaths were buried in New York. And that was the Potter's Field. Well, let me show you another parallel. And this one was brought up by a rabbi. He was a Jewish rabbi, and he actually noticed the paradigm, actually. And for starters, you had Ahab. And Ahab was a very wicked king. He was married to Jezebel, and you hear that she was the most wicked woman that ever lived. And it's true, she was. Ahab was not a very put his foot down kind of guy. He wasn't really authoritative. His wife seemed to rule more over him. And he was one of those that if this crowd was happy with this, then he went with that. If that crowd was happy with that, he went with that. It was never working it out or making it. They could be two totally separate things, but he'll agree with both. Okay? But Jezebel loved to run the show, didn't she? She loved to run the show. And Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard that joined his land so bad that he became sick. And when he became sick, Jezebel figured out a way that she was going to get it. Because when, make sure I read this right, because I got everything kind of messed up a little bit, so I can get my things. Jezebel decided that she was going to get that vineyard for her husband. And she did. But see, when Ahab approached Nahab, he wouldn't sell Ahab the land. In Numbers 36:7, he said, according to the Levitical code, no land could be transferred permanently by sale or exchange. Every one of the children of Israel must keep himself to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. So the land was not for sale. And so what Jezebel did was she had Naboth killed. In addition to that, she had his sons killed too, so there'd be no heirs. And that gave it to the king. You notice that Ahab never questioned how she got it or anything? Not once. I don't think he really cared, did he? No, he got what he wanted. But he wanted more than that. He already broke the Leviticus code. And with that, he went for Ramah, I'm not even going to say this right, Ramah Gilead, is that right?
That's right.
He went after that property. And when he did, he asked the King Joseph of the southern kingdom to join him. And when he went after that property, it actually belonged to the tribe of Gad. But what happened was they had set that land aside for the Levites. It was a refuge, a city of refuge. So now he's attacking the Levites. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? And that's how he got killed. He served 22 years as king. But the last 3 years, when he broke that the Leviticus code, those last 3 years brought shame on him. Now Jezebel, she continued to rule because her next son took the stand, and he ruled for, let's see here, 2 years. Ahaziah, he ruled for 2 years. And in his 2 years, she was the mother. She remained in the capital, or the kingdom. And then Jehoram ran after that. It's pronounced Jehoram, is the Israelites say it. But he was the ninth king of the northern kingdom. That was the second son. And he ruled for 12 years. So she remained on the world stage again with him. But at the end of Jezebel's reign, you got to think this woman was all about Baal worship. She refused anything to do with the God of Israel. Ahab was raised a Jewish man, right? He's Jewish. He was raised in Jewish ways of life. He knew the Jewish living, but he adapted to hers. And Baal worship was so bad in that time. But this is where Elijah had challenged 450 Baal worshiping prophets of Jezebel, but for Baal. But at the same time, nobody would stand with Elijah. He stood alone, literally. But at the same time, Jezebel would not do anything in the Hebrew text whatsoever. Everything with her had to be Baal. So Ahab had to conform. When her 2 sons ruled with her, they basically ruled, but she stayed in a position where she would always be in the kingdom. But at the same time, they too followed Baal. They didn't change. Now, let me show you something that parallels with that. There was a Jehu that came along. Jehu was not a Christian man whatsoever. He was not even Jewish. He came into he was anointed by God though, and he came and he raised Jezebel to the throne. And when he did, he beat her there. He took the throne from her, and then she was thrown out the window. And on her last day, before she knew she was going to be killed, she put her makeup on. And she did that in hopes to seduce him. So she was being Jezebel. So anyway, the Baal worship requires a lot of children be sacrificed, and that's probably the biggest thing about Baal worship. There's plenty of other things that they do, and the Illuminati is part of it. I found a calendar literally from the 1st of March to the end of April, and there's even an Illuminati day for sacrifices. And they have April 19th set aside for human sacrifices to this day. This is 2021 now. It never stopped. It's carried on all of these years. But Jehu took the throne. He was one of those people. He didn't get along with anybody. Nobody knew what he was going to do next. He was very set in his ways. And he came in Ahab's kingdom, and he took everyone out of office and put his own people in there. Nobody got along with him. He argued with everything, but it was his way or no way. In addition to that, the witches even got into it with him in that day. Sound familiar? Because Jehu versus Jezebel, we know who won that one. Okay, well, the Clintons, let's start with them. Because Hillary Clinton served 22 years with her husband on the world stage. She went on another 8 years as the senator of New York and became the queen of abortions, similar to what a Jezebel. It was about murdering children. She spent another 4 years as the Secretary of State. And she took 2 years off to run for president, which she was defeated in August 2016. Did I say August? 2016, sorry. But those were 22 years plus 14, same as Jezebel. Well, that could be one parallel, but let's look at her husband. He served exactly 22 years. But in the last 3 years of his presidency, he had fortification, also desiring something that was not his, right? The same as Nebuchadnezzar's vineyard. But her last name was Lewinsky, and he brought shame to him the last 3 years of those 22, same as Ahab. But that wasn't all. When I studied, I found out that Levites kept the Lu name, the Eli name, but they kept it because of like it was Rabon or something, and they kept those names just like Lewinsky, but even that was one of the Levites' names. It's not saying that she was a Levite, but it sure raised some flags, didn't it? It raised some flags. But that wasn't all. Jehu raised Jezebel to the throne, didn't he? He didn't get along with anybody. Everything was done his way. And the witches even cast spells on him. Y'all see, in our day, did we not witness a full moon with him trying to cast spells on Trump? Everybody said he was the modern day Cyrus because he gave back the land to Israel, but he was also a modern day Jehu, was he not? You couldn't tell him what to do. He did what he wanted to do, and he replaced everybody in Ahab's cabinet. And he wasn't afraid of anybody. Well, that was the story, the parallels, but it didn't stop there. It didn't stop there at all. Trump, he didn't win the last election. We know that he didn't. But God sets kings up, and God's the one who takes them down. They can control the election. They can do whatever they want. They can put down, get someone off the world stage if they feel like they need to get him off because he's interrupting their plans. But God has the ultimate say-so. And sometimes things happen because they have to follow a pattern. Now, the Temple of Baal came to New York and also was London. This was advertisement for the altar. It's actually the arch of the Temple of Baal that sits in Syria. It's primarily Syria, I believe is the name of it. But it was destroyed by ISIS. But the arch itself, which was the entrance, they call it the gateway. And nonetheless, it erected in New York, and it also erected in London. It wasn't the only place either. This is what it actually looked like. And if you see the altar, the entrance, that's called the arch. And it erected in New York City in 2016. It wasn't the only place. That's a picture of it in New York City. This is the Arch of Baal in Washington, D.C. And it sits directly in front of the Capitol. It's going to blow your mind what I found, because this is it in London, England. It didn't stop there either, believe it or not. This is a 2,000-year-old arch. It's actually a Roman arch. 48 feet high and 23 feet wide. In 2016, it arose in Dubai, Persian Gulf Coast of the United Arab Emirates. Then it arose in New York City in 2016. Then it arose in London in 2016. Then it arose in Florence, Italy in 2017. Then it arose in Washington, D.C. in 2018. Then it arose in Geneva, Switzerland in 2019. And then it arose in Palmyra, Syria, where Russia where the original one stood, Russia and the United Nations is restoring the gateway. In other words, they're restoring the original arch. Is that not scary?
Oh.
That ain't all. China's got it up for 2 to be put on in China. 2 to be put in China. It's worldwide. It never stopped. But you remember when Trump came out and started praying, and he prayed out loud over the speakers, over the television, everyone, it was a freedom of speech. It was a freedom of speech. But at the same time, this is their freedom of speech. And they exercise it based on that very verse. And I'm going to back up to that and say it again, because this very verse right here. And Elijah came into all the people and said, how long halt ye but be between 2 opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. Their comment on that is he's saying that Baal is Lord, because if the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, that doesn't mean that Baal is Lord. It says if you want to follow Baal, go ahead. Never once in here does it call Baal Lord. Do you see that? But the verses I saw that they were posting said, the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal be Lord, follow him. But that's not what the Bible says. Do you see that? They, just like Satan twisted the words of a verse when he was tempting Jesus in the desert. Right? He knows how it goes. But this gets more serious than that, y'all. You see when they advertise that, you see the one on the right-hand side and they're handing a child to him. Baal is known for sacrifices of children. But that isn't all. That's London, England. This is where Russia's working to restore the gateway to the Temple of Baal, and the United Nations is helping them there. And this is the one in, I think that was the one that's Geneva or Florence, Italy. It'll be one or the other. But here's all of them together. This is 6 of them so far. But that's not all of them, because 2 is coming up in China. Look what I found. This is the New World Order. This is a deity. This is a deity of Baal. And you also seen that same figure with 2 children standing beside it right here in Little Rock, Arkansas, in the town square where the Satanic Church is. That's exactly where it is. And it's the same one. Yeah. Biden versus Trump. That election, when that happened, you got to think the coronavirus hit, did it not? Mm-hmm. The election had already taken place. The coronavirus did not interfere with that, did it? There was other things going on. But when the counting and the recounting, that's when the coronavirus came about. It did. But this is the biggest thing of all. Some people were, in that time, they had, people were getting sick in Israel and they had to go and go to tents to vote. Do you remember that? When they had to go and vote against tents and so forth. I remember seeing something about that. But Biden and Trump, there was another part of that paradigm that did not finish, and it's still playing out. And it's very important that we do recognize it, because during this period here, Trump was removed. But for either, whatever his purpose was, they needed him out. And then COVID was a good bypass in there. But the biggest thing was that Biden, let me see if I get my note here, because Biden, they know is not, they argue the fact right now that he's capable of running the country. But this is not about a political thing. This is about the paradigms in the Bible and what we're seeing in our time and what the Bible actually says will happen in our time. And we're seeing it. And the leaders do play a large part. Yes. We saw that in Elijah's day, did we not? Right. It's not about who is president. It's about what's transpiring with the president and the history that's going on now. Jehu, and this is what blew my mind. In 2 Kings chapter 10, Jehu had sent 80 of the soldiers to stand outside of the Capitol building. Not Capitol building. Did I say that? Outside of Baal temple. And they went inside and they started killing people, and they slaughtered so many people. But it was very similar to that of the Capitol building on January 6th. The difference was The modern day Jehu Trump, there was not many people killed. It was not related to that. No one was killed inside the building that I know of, was it?
No.
Not inside the building. But none of that transpired. It was good that it didn't. But it was later on that it came out in Metropolitan Police Department that 80 arrests were reported and a U.S. Capitol, at the U.S. Capitol. How about that? Exactly 80 of any number. 80 went to stand in front of that temple at Baal in Jehu's day, ordered by Jehu, and exactly 80 were arrested in the modern day Jehu. Is that scary? But it was more to that. The Speaker of the House and the U.S. Senate from the Senate floor both said 2 separate occasions they desecrated the temple, talking about the Capitol building. And they, and the other one said desecrated our temple. So isn't that interesting that they would call the White House their temple? That was our people, okay? So then 2 objections were heard and rejected. 1 senator and 80 was the House of Representatives. So there you see it again. The window of time during that period is what we're experiencing now. That window period time that we have is people need to turn back. It's more than when you see, because if you really look at the overall picture, temples popping up everywhere, right there in Washington, D.C., that arch was standing with out framing the Capitol directly across the street from it at the very time the Capitol was breached. But at the same time, the arch itself someone had taken red paint and painted on both sides, the figures on both sides. I'm sure they cleaned it off, but the bottom line is, that just proved to me the temple was there at the time. But if it was, then when was it put in? And that's when I found it had been put in 2018 or 2019. But it was also, it popped up an Illuminati party in 2019. In 2019 is when China said they were putting 1 or 2 in their Times Square. Times are changing around us. It's not a secret. Cashless society's been brought up. Nancy Pelosi's already put it on the table on a bill. And it hasn't been signed, but it hasn't been rejected or vetoed yet either. Nothing. We don't know what we're approaching in these days. We know what the Bible tells us. And that Bible tells us that there will come a time when buying and selling would be a change, wouldn't it? So you know that there's going to be some kind of financial system that's going to take place, because you won't be able to buy and sell without this mark. And to get that mark, they've even brought up the computers, the one world computers. Now when I look back and I saw something like this and the one world order, I had to look. It made me really search it out. And what I found blew my mind. There was an agenda, a calendar laid out for March 20th is when it started. And it ended at the end of April. But one of those things which blew my mind was April 1st when it called for, beware Christians, this is meant for you. Christians will be imprisoned and killed as a hate mongers for not accepting the New World Pagan Order. Now, I don't know if that was just someone's comment, but what I did see is on April 4th, they celebrate an honoring Asclepios, I don't know, Lepios or whatever, god of healing, and Hygia, goddess of health. And it says who? World Health Order. That is who. You know the ones. And that's, so we know, and we already know that the United Nations is right there with Russia in rebuilding the arch. That was stated that was world news. And they're rebuilding the actual arch that's on the Syrian temple, the Baal temple in Syria. So that's scary. But when you sit there and think about all these arches popping up in all these different countries that were there the whole time, just how many are involved? It was a Roman arch. But at the same time, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. You know it, all the nations are going to come against Israel in the end. All the nations are coming together now, but it's under Baal. the worship of Baal. Children's sacrifices. This is actually, April 19th is a child sacrifice to Baal. That's the actual date of their little sacrifice for the children. But it's not a joke. It's real. It never ceased. It's still going on. You got children? Worry. Worry. I'm not kidding. You got grandkids? I worry. But it's not anything that we can do except pray. Because what we do know is that when Reagan took office, we thought that there'd be a revival, but it never came. When Trump took office, things were starting to turn around. And they thought there would be a revival, but again, it never came. We're praying for a revival. It is more needed now than it ever was. And it's sincere heart. But the Lord said in 2 Chronicles, we get to that, because if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. It takes God's people to take a stand. Elijah stood alone, but he stood, and the God of Israel was there, wasn't he? He showed he was there. And that was just one man. One. Our faith speaks volumes for us, because that's the mountains that we move us with, that even a mustard seed of faith. But if you don't even have any faith at all, and you wonder why your mountain don't move, start reassessing it, but don't quit. Just take a second look at the angle, because you're missing something pretty big. We need God in our lives. And this now, and what we're seeing in our world around us, and what we know is put on the board in the bill, the cashless society, and it's bitcoin.com that they want to go through and make it all one world computer. It's all there. It's a matter of it all coming together at one time. But it does say that there is a, let me back up a minute, because I got ahead of myself. And at that time shall Michael stand, this is Daniel 12:1, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time, and at that time thy people shall be delivered. Every one that shall be found written in the book, and that's the Lamb's book of life. He's going to rescue his children. If it was like the days of Noah and like the days of Lot, we know for a fact that he took his faithful out, and the land was, the whole city was destroyed. And then he took his faithful, he took Noah's family, and he destroyed it. He annihilated the whole world at that point, all human life. Did he not? But he will do so here. His faithful few, faithful. That's the key word. Anything in your life that you need to get out, or you need to change, or you need to fix, for God's sake, do it. Your time is so short. If you don't look around and see what's going on, that rapture really is any time, isn't it? I've heard scholars say, yes, the Lord is going to let Satan have his run, and then he's going to make a mighty show and prove himself, da-da-da. I don't see where that happened. I don't. God's going to take his people out. Yes, he is. He's going to take his people out. He said he would. He said, here's the exact words. Luke 21:36. Watch ye therefore and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Those things are going to come to pass. Jesus will be back. Yes, he will. He'll be back for his faithful few, the overcomers that Revelation 2 and 3 spoke of. That's the ones he'll be back for, his faithful followers. But at the same time, those, whatever reason your road was not made white, you'll go through some part of that tribulation and mourn for Christ. But you're going to have to make your roads white. That means it's going to be hard not to take that mark. But you better not take that mark. Whatever you do, just don't take it. But being strong then, if you can't be strong now, how are you going to be strong then? How? It's going to be far worse than what it is now. This is very important, but I had to bring this out because I didn't realize just how many arches were popping up all over the world. For it to be just, it wouldn't take much for all of them to come against Israel. And if you look back, one of them, where's my little note here? One of them was while the Persian Gulf Coast in 2016, Trump was president of the United Arab Emirates. Did they not were the ones that signed one of the treaties with Israel? You know they were. You know they were. Their religions are different, but they all came together under one Abraham Accord. You remember that? The Abraham Accord was what was used to bring everybody together because God is the same God, but it isn't. It is not. And does that not prove it? Okay. I know that was a lot. God's going to come back for his children. But he never once said it's going to all get better. If you could show me that in the Bible, that'd be one thing. But I do know at the end it will get better when the world ends, because he'll come back at the end of that 7-year tribulation. But at that point, the tribulation will have already transpired. For those that are leery or questions about your salvation, for God's sake, don't sit there and hold it in thinking you got plenty of time, because you really don't. If you don't see what's around you, you need to. You really need to see that. They're everywhere. I had no idea just how many were more for Baal than anything else. More for the even the stock market exchange downtown had a golden bull sitting outside. Did y'all ever think that that's not the golden calf? That's exactly what it was. And it still sits there. It's their trademark. Keep all these things in mind. They're there all the time. It's just they're now really popping up. But the freedom of religion is blowing out now. And the problem is, it's already been said that China was thinking of, well, they're bringing talks of making war against America. If they do, they know that America has always been Israel's allies. And they're not too worried about, no one seems to be too worried about Biden. And it's scary, because we don't know where we're going from here. And then being an uncertain nation in a crisis is very scary, because we are the land of the free. We are, and always have been, very rich, powerful nation. But we have already started falling backwards. And as a result of that, world powers will take the stage to be the next world power. That's not going to be a surprise. The Bible speaks of 4 kings that will take the stage to fight for world power. Yeah. One from the east, one from the north, one from the south, and one from the west. Now, I'm going to leave that there, because I know that we can talk about 4 kings later, right? But at the same time, we know we have things to worry about. Our nation's in a lot of danger. But the most important thing is your salvation, because we know that this world is changing, but the moral standard has dropped greatly. We have been through cultures of different kind, but these kind of, the war that we're going through now, we went through a political war. This is not the same thing. This is a cultural, a religious war. And the Bible told us about it, didn't it? Told us about the buying and selling. Told us about the different things that we would encounter that is coming. Famines that will strike. They're all coming. They're all coming. I'm going to leave it there and just tell you that if you are not saved, or you're saved and you're just not rooted in God like you should be, you're not living the life. Being saved and living the life of God, a godly life, is totally different. It is not the same. If you're not living a godly life, then you're not a Christian. Because a Christian is on the inside, and it'll come out from the outside. If people have to ask a question whether or not you're a Christian, you got something to worry about, don't you? For yourself. Because they should see it in you. They should see it in you. That should be automatic. Brian, if you will come stand up front for me, please.